Welcome to a new session of BD Rugby. Apologies for the slight gap between this video and the last video. And actually, the stuff I drafted for this video has kind of moved on since they've obviously reduced the squad down. And then there was some suggestions in the Daily Mail of a leaked team. But I think my points that I'm making today are still valid. I think the interesting thing I've seen from the selection, and is given due to some of the injuries that have occurred, I think that the second row looks really interesting to me. I think particularly the inclusion of Alex Coles. I think Alex Coles, you only have to look at highlights in the Premiership in the last year. He's often on the end of things or creating things. He looks a very, very mobile and an interesting sort of type player. I know in the Daily Mail there's a suggestion of him playing blindside in the absence of Courtney Lawes. That's not really what my point was about. I know that Eddie Jones, like quite a few of the international coaches, like to have that additional back row player who can work in the line out. Personally, I'd like to see, it would be a bit bold, but England go away from that traditionalist nuggety type second row, which I suppose at the moment is probably occupied by Hill, and maybe go with both Itoje and Coles, who both offer a little bit of a unique USP to the game. I think they bring a lot of mobility. I think they've got good hands, and perhaps if your other players can do quite a lot of that grunt work, then they can offer themselves beyond that. And I think if England want to play a little bit more of an expansive game, then they've got to kind of go with players rather than being focused on players maybe like Dave Ribbons, who is more that traditional sort of nuggety type player, head down, high work rate. And that's not to be said anything against Johnny Hill, who I think actually has, since the Lions tour and that confidence and then moving up to Sale, I think has taken his game on. But perhaps he's a sort of player that you bring on later on and perhaps doesn't offer quite that expansive game. But as I say, it looks like Coles may well be playing in the back row. So at least he gets some exposure. I suppose similarly to Courtney Lawes, I've always called for him playing in the second row, because again, it offers then we've got lots of quality in that back row. Why are we having to bench them? Because we're bringing a second row into the back row. I think the other thing that notes, and it's probably still the case even though we've streamlined the squad, is we do lack a bit of creativity in the midfield. There's this massive push for Smith, Farrell, Tuolangi. Farrell and Tuolangi bring loads of experience. They are test match players, but you could argue that do they have that real creativity? It's going to be quite telegraphed what both are going to do. I think to combat that, England have got to look at trying to use their wingers a little bit more within the midfield. I think the selection of Jack Nowell will support that, because he is traditionally a very good player going to look for the ball and making opportunities. But then the only downside of that is he probably doesn't have that raw pace. I think it's unfortunate that Harry Arundel is injured, because I do think that he would probably have been given more game time, particularly with the absence of Tommy Freeman. But we may see Johnny May coming back into the team, which again does at least give you that outlet of actual pace out wide. But I think the only way that we can combat that lack of creativity is working moves where we bring those players into the patch. Even though it becomes a bit predictable, and actually I think if we need to play an expansive game, and I say need because I think some of the games we probably do, we just need to tighten it up depending on weather or the team we're playing. But where an expansive game is needed, we need to have the players that we can actually use that for. And I think the other thing links to that I do think from the initial selection, we do have an exciting back three there. I think we have a lot of players who could play. I thought it was really nice to see Caleb Murley get a call up. I think it's really interesting that they've gone to for this streamlined squad. So we've got May, we've got Cockner Singer, Noel. So they're likely to be our wingers, with Freddie Stewart at a fullback. I mean, that does offer you variety across the piece. So I think that's quite positive. Still question whether, other than May, whether we could pursue some players with real pace. I say Arundel probably would be in that bracket. Or Radwan keeps touching on the squad, but something is obviously not clicking for him to make match day squads and such like. But someone like that it still creates fear. You only have to see what Reece Zammit did on the weekend for Gloucester. I mean, the guy has a good skill set and is developing his game beyond just his pace. But actually, in a lot of those examples of where in the highlights reel, really fundamentally it came down to his pace that made it work. You know, yes, it was a nice offload or a kick through, etc. But actually, it's the pace that gives him that opportunity. And I think England have potentially lacked that. So as I've talked about in other videos, I'd like to see perhaps them use that sort of video. But I think looking towards the team, I still think that there's areas that we need to develop. I think linked to the back three, I think it's still about consistency. I think particularly in that back three, I think if England want to play or be able to play an expansive game, it relies on people being comfortable at where that other individual is. So, as I mentioned, if a winger is brought into the play, in whether it's in a move or in broken play, they go looking for the ball. They need to be comfortable that their other back three members or colleagues will cover that position. And I think that only works when you play together. I think you can train, but you've got to see it in view, because it's almost an innate trust in that person. I don't think we don't have the benefit in those positions of people playing together. I'm just trying to think of who's in there. Not playing together at club level. So it's not as if they can draw that away. Whereas I think in other facets of the or other positions, we can draw a little bit on their club trust and relationships. I think it's a really exciting stage for England. You've got 4 good competitive games to see where this England team are at off the back of a successful Australia tour. I just hope that we can I think we can just put a lot of this good work into progress, and hopefully, we come out of the tour successful, so which I think is probably 3 or 4 wins out of 4. But thank you. That's just a snapshot of what we're doing. We'll be doing some reviews of the matches coming up to get my sort of thoughts on that and where we're going. But that's just a flavour of what's to come. So please subscribe to the videos and look out for the next ones coming. Thank you.